Once we identified the legitimate enemies, I told him the next step is that we need to analyze their positions. Where are they? What are they doing? What strategies are they using? If we understand how they think, we can outmaneuver them. But then I added a warning. I told him, we're not just strategizing, we're going on a quest. And this quest is going to be dangerous. I explained on this journey, we're going to face many different dragons. Now, these dragons aren't going to be the big mythical beasts. They're going to be dangerous foes like self-doubt, interference, distractions, and the overwhelming noise of the world telling us to quit. Now, to be successful in this mission, we're going to need to slay these dragons one by one. And as we discussed this, I reminded them that every victory, every small kingdom that we conquer would strengthen us. With each success, our might and our confidence would grow, and so would our courage. It's this momentum that would prepare us to take on the larger opposition when the time came. The goal, I told him, isn't just to win the war. It's to grow into the most capable leader that is capable of leading the most powerful kingdom of all. And in that moment, I saw the spark of understanding in his eyes. He wasn't just setting goals anymore. He was stepping into the role of a king, ready to lead his army and face the dragons ahead.
Leaders are not born in a womb. They are forged through heat, pressure, and a whole lot of sweat. The Fire Forged Leader podcast serves the audience through exploring leadership at work, in the community, and with the family, using a practical perspective and real-life experiences from the host, Steve Baumgartner, and his guests in the Forge. Now, it's time to enter the Forge with the Fire Forged Leader.
Now, before we get started, I want to do a bit of housekeeping. You know, if you follow me on social media, you probably noticed things have changed just a little bit. I've kicked off a new business where I'm helping men drive their businesses forward. Now, these men can either be self-employed or they can be in a high leadership position in a corporate setting. It doesn't matter. Leadership is leadership. The real cool thing about this, though, is that it's focused on making money and being successful. But this opportunity is special because it's also about gaining balance, which means connecting with yourself first, with your wife and your children while you're driving that profit forward. So if you're interested in working one-on-one with me, reach out to me on Instagram at FireForgedLeader. Now, next, you guys come here week after week for this content. I need you to help me out today, all right? I need you to hit that subscribe button. I need you to share this episode with someone that can benefit from it. And I need you to like, comment, and rate the show or rate this episode. With that being said, let's get into it. Now, in this example that I talked about in the opening, I want to break that down just a little bit today and really give you some background here. So let's start off with some of the metaphors that I used in this opening. The first one being kingdoms battling for dominance, right? Now, I told him to imagine himself as the king of a small but mighty kingdom, with other kingdoms representing challenges, distractions, and competition. And I want you to think about that a little bit, right? I want you to think about it from the aspect of your business, of your leadership, of your goals and your movement that you want to do to make forward in your business. Whether you work for a corporation and you're a leader within that corporation, or whether you run your own business, I want you to think about it from this theatrical level, right? Wanted him to understand that you need to understand where you sit compared to your competition, whether that is another plant in the same organization, whether it's the competition out there in the marketplace. You need to understand where you stand. So you need to judge up your kingdom, right? We can't, as small business owners, take on the tech giants like Apple. We need to do our own thing, right? But there's other people in those areas that we can start working or looking to challenge in the industry. But we don't need to be scared of all that. We need to understand it, but we don't need to be scared of it. There's legitimate enemies that we have out there, right? We identified some of these smaller kingdoms. Those immediate battles, we can win. We can win those at first. And that helps us grow our businesses. It grows our might and our confidence. Now, going on, there's another metaphor that I used, and that's of the dragons, right? I told him that the quest was going to be dangerous. I told him that there was going to be dragons to slay, self-doubt, distractions, and noise, right? Each dragon that we defeat is going to make him stronger. It's going to make me stronger. It's going to make every leader stronger for the bigger battles ahead, right? Most people think that you can just make a goal, put your head down, work towards your goal. But let me tell you it this way, right? Every 24 hours is already filled up with something, right? We all have the same 24 hours. So when we stop and think about that, let's take this out of the business scope and look at it from a self-development scope. If we're wanting to lose 20 pounds, we're going to have to do some things differently, right? We're going to have to eat different. We're going to have to prepare meals. We're going to have to shop differently. We're going to have to do some research, all sorts of things. But where do we get that time from? Well, the time comes from all the shit that's getting our way right now, right? So sitting in front of the TV, scrolling on social media, whatever it is, those kind of things are our dragons that we need to slay. Let's bring this back into the business world, right? So what are the dragons that we need to slay? Maybe there's some employees who don't understand the mission. Maybe there's some training. Maybe there's some self-doubt. Maybe there's there's noise, there's competing distractions. There's people out there trying to get your money for marketing or this, that, or the other, right? There's a lot of noise. And what we need to do is we need to understand our kingdom. We need to understand what our dragons are. We need to understand what our goal setting is so that we can drive forward and slay those dragons, get them the hell out of the way so we can focus on what we need to do. So lots of different metaphors in there. But I want to rewind the tape a little bit, and I want to go back and not really tell the story, but put a little bit more into the story with less dramatization and a little bit more detail. So this was just mid-Friday afternoon, right? This young man comes into my office. I had asked him to come over so we could talk about a few things. This young man is someone that I have really high regard for, and he has a ton of potential. He wants to get involved in everything. So I'm picking him up as a mentee. All right. So Monday, I'm taking the top brass, and we're planning to have a goal setting session with that leadership team. And I want to just tell them where my mind's at, right? I don't need to tell the entire leadership group, but since this young man is someone that I'm mentoring, I want to let him understand what's going on inside my head before we get into that meeting. So he comes over to my office. I walk up to my glass board, right? And I'm sitting here, I'm sketching and I'm talking and I'm, just going crazy on this whiteboard. And it helped me realize that as I'm going through this story of knights and dragons and kingdoms and battles and how it relates to the business that we're in, I realize that this young man is entirely, fully engaged. He's sitting there on the edge of his seat waiting for the climax of the story and how it's going to tie to setting the goals of this company, right? And he says during the meeting, dude, if you hear me say, let's slay some effing dragons in the meeting, it's just because I'm excited. I hope that's not out of line, he says. I said, hell no. I love that enthusiasm. I would probably get right behind you and let you lead the rest of the conversation if you did that. Anyways, the point is he was all in. He understood my theatrics, right? He understood the mission coming away, and he was excited about moving it forward. Now, I could have simply told him and gone in and told my team, and, really this young man, the straightforward method that we would use to set goals, right? I could have said something like, well, first we're going to start out with a vision statement. You guys know I love vision, right? But first we're going to start out with a vision statement. And then we're going to break that down into SMART goals. You know what SMART goals are? It's specific, measurable, attainable, relatable, and time-bound goals. Now, when we write these SMART goals, we will need to understand the obstacles in the way and have a mitigation plan for each obstacle so that it does not take us down. Now, that's boring, guys. Come on. That is absolute dog shit. Would it be shorter and cleaner to do that? Yeah, I got that out of my mouth in a couple seconds, right? But here's what you lose, all right? Sometimes short messaging is not the way to go. So here's the reason why. You should use a little bit of theatrics. You should use a little bit of storytelling in your leadership style. When you don't, you lose evoking emotion in your participants in the meeting, right? In your participants in the mission. And the reason why you don't evoke that emotion is because you're not speaking to them in their language. So the reason why this young man related to what I was talking about is number one, he's a man. We grow up listening to stories about dragons and knights and kingdoms and, all that kind of stuff. So he could relate to it. He's also a big Game of Thrones fan, right? So it was highly relatable to him. So when he heard about things, it was excitement. It was tapping into his manhood. All right. Another thing is that you miss the chance to break down complex ideas. All right. You miss the chance to break down complex ideas. So when I sit here and I talk to men and I go, okay, it's time to write a vision, right? They're like, what? What? And then if I go, now it's time to do SMART goals, they're like, huh? Huh? Can we get some training on what SMART goals look like? They get really disconnected very quickly, right? So when we storytell, when I talk about kingdoms and I talk about slaying dragons and all these things and relate them to things that people already understand, we can break down these complex ideas and drive them home with these stories, right? With these theatrics. And then here is, people don't give enough credit for this one, but when you tell stories when you tell stories about your personal life, when you relate stories to the mission, you get to inject your personality and you get to inject your energy into the situation. And you get the ability to connect the dots with the person in both their head, but also their heart. All right. So they not only understand the mission, but they start to understand you as a leader. They understand your energy. They get excited and they connect the dots all at the same time. It is a beautiful thing. So before we move on to the next section, excuse me, let me leave you with this. All right. Leadership, like this young man's journey, isn't just about setting goals or achieving victories. It's about crafting a vision. It's inspiring others and embracing the theatrics that make your message unforgettable. All right, let's go ahead and make this actionable. All right, so I'm going to give you a framework right now that's pretty short, but I want you to grab a pen and a notebook so that you can take down these steps, okay? This is a framework that is simple, but it's not natural, okay? So I didn't used to tell stories and I didn't used to be theatrical like I am now. It wasn't until I started studying some of the best leaders on the planet that I was able to connect the dots for myself. Now, to look at some of these powerful leaders, leaders like Winston Churchill, Martin Luther King, I have a dream, right? I don't know how many times he mentions that he has a dream, but you understand that he's looking for something better, right? Steve Jobs, he changed the entire industry in music and smartphones, many other ways through storytelling. Simon Sinek, very, very popular leader right now. Jocko Willink, another very popular leader. Scott Mann, who's a personal friend of mine. He teaches storytelling so that people can be successful, or even Theodore Roosevelt, right? The one thing they all have in common, it isn't their message. Every one of their messages is different. It isn't their style of leadership or anything else leadership related. It's that each and every one of these people can tell a damn good story and they connect to the audience. Now, I want you to be masterful in this art as well. So, I've really put together a 5-point framework here that you can use. This is your last reminder. Get yourself a pen, get yourself a notebook, because I want you to take this down, okay? So, you probably noticed if you watch this podcast, I move around, I dance around, different things like that. If you see me on stage, it is that amplified, right? So, what this is mastering our presence. All right. So, when we master our presence, what we do is we master our body language, right? We command attention through our body language, through our tone, and through our confidence. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube right now, if you were watching this and I was, doing this and sitting here like this and talking like this, that would be very annoying and you wouldn't come back to the show. I'll tell you that right now, right? But what you see instead is you see me standing tall. I actually, right here, I don't know if you guys can see this, but I stand up for my whole podcast. I found that sitting down, I tend to slouch a little bit more. My presence wasn't there, things like that. There's also, besides the stall or standing tall, sorry, every now and again I trip over my own tongue. Anyways, besides standing tall, besides confidence, we also need to make deliberate gestures, right? Have you ever talked to that person and what happens is that you're like, what the hell are they talking about? Because their gestures are all over the place and it doesn't match what they're talking about. But when we talk about making deliberate gestures, what we're talking about is I'm going to go on a path. Or things like, when I started, I was over here. But as I grew and I move across the room from left to right so that I can make a physical appearance on both sides, so that I can refer back to who I was on the left and who I became on the right. We also need to do it through eye contact. And this is something that I have to control quite a bit because I am distractible, right? A little bit of ADHD in me. Someone walks through the room, there's a noise over here or whatever, my eye contact goes, right? But your listener wants to see your eyes. They want to see you talking to them, right? So to sum this up, right? Mastering presence is positioning yourself in the room. You need to stand tall. You need to use your body to show changes. You need to use your gestures. You need to use the tonality of your voice to be able to make a point. We didn't talk about tonality, uh, but I'll get to that a little bit more. The tonality goes into mastering presence, but it's also another point of the framework. So I'll get to that here in a second. Second thing is storytelling, right? Everybody relates to stories. Once again, it creates emotional engagement. But we need to use these stories carefully. We need to frame the key points with a beginning, a middle, and the end. And then we need to make it relatable to the team's mission. Now, I shared the story that I told you guys, right? Let's talk about that. When I'm talking about vision, right, there's 2 points that we need to talk about. Where we're at currently, we need to understand that, and where we're going. All right. So I explain that as kingdoms. We need to understand the force of our army, all that kind of stuff. We need to understand our enemy, and we need to know what we're going to attack and what we're going to overcome. And that was how I talked about vision, right? When we talked about goals and objections to goals, I talked about slaying dragons and I talked about this quest that we were going to be on. And then to bring it all back around, we talked about overcoming to get to the end. We talked about overcoming these other kingdoms so that we could face mightier opposition and we could become this mightiest kingdom in the land, right? So it needs to have a beginning, middle, and an end. It needs to be relatable. You need to connect the dots for people. You don't just tell random stories. You tell stories for a purpose. Going back to tonality, point number 3 is pacing and delivery, right? So when I talk about pacing and delivery, what I'm really talking about is utilize your voice. Utilize your voice. And you probably noticed that I do this without even thinking. But there's different parts of your voice that you can use. You'll hear a lot of people say, when you are presenting, you don't want to have any pauses. Bullshit, I say. I just used one right there. Bullshit, I say. And the reason why that is because nobody wants a rambling ding dong in front of them, right? They want someone who provokes thought within them. All right, so when you utilize a pause, make sure that it's a reflection moment. All right. I also want you to use your tone and your rhythm so that you can emphasize key points. Now, here's a good example. My Uncle Ronnie just died, right? You don't want to use that kind of tone. It makes you sound insane. But you can say, in a recent event, my Uncle Ron just died in a horrible car accident. I slowed my rhythm down, my tone dropped. But on the other side, I could, but I remember the days when Ron used to take me to Six Flags Adventure Park and we would ride the roller coasters, right? And you can use that tonality and rhythm to really emphasize the key points in your story. So I want you to practice this. I want you to practice telling stories, tell your family stories, do one on ones with people in your team, and try and really work through this. If you need to write it down, write it down. But it's really not that unnatural. We tell stories in society all the time. We tell stories in our tribes. We just need to take the thought pattern that stories don't belong in the workplace out of our heads and start telling damn stories today. All right, so I think that was number 3. Let's move on to number 4, which is visual cues, right? So I do this quite often. I'll do things like, pull out my headphones or whatever. But this can be overdone too. But let me use a different example. So this morning, the wife and I, we were sitting here talking about our days, drinking our coffee, and you can tell a story by using a prop. You can use slides, of course. I don't recommend it. I'm not a big slide guy. If I use slides, it's because I need to, and it's usually about 6 slides. All right. But you can also use physical demonstrations to reinforce your message, right? I like the use of props though, because it helps bring your audience into your story, right? For the story that I told, I used a whiteboard, right? I used a whiteboard so that I could draw out a map of the kingdoms. I could draw out the dragon. Wasn't very good, but it was drawn. But also be careful with props because you can confuse your audience with a prop or with too many props, excuse me. You got to make sure that it relates, but you also got to keep it simple. If you're going to use the coffee cup, use the coffee cup through the entire thing. If you bring a hammer to your talk, use that hammer and keep on referring back to the hammer, right? I if I wasn't in front of a whiteboard, I might have brought a toy of uh one of my kids' dragons, right? They have some little knight sets and stuff. I could have used, that dragon, or I could have brought a castle or whatever. But it helps the visual senses of your audience. So I'd suggest to do it. Just keep it simple. All right. Let's go on to the 5th one, which is really to engage the senses, which we were just talking about, but let's really hammer this home, right? We need to activate multiple senses to create memorable moments, right? We use phrases, we use metaphors or sensory props to evoke specific emotions. And we need to do this, really this encapsulates the rest, right? The tonality of our voice, the connecting with the audience, the use of props, all those sorts of things. What we're trying to do when we use theatrics or storytell is what we're trying to do is connect at a deeper level with our audience, right? So we use words like this challenges like being in a storm at sea. We can either steer the ship together or we can go over and capsize together. right? We use this theatrical language because it's like, yeah, I want to be part of that team that steers together. That's what they take out of it. That's what we want them to take out of it. So let's recap that real quick. We need to master our presence, command attention through our body language, our tone, and our confidence. We need to storytell, and we use these stories to create that emotional engagement. We pace and deliver our message correctly. So we utilize pauses, we change our tone, and we change the rhythm to emphasize these key points in our story. We use visual cues like this coffee cup to incorporate props, slides, or physical demonstrations to reinforce that message. And then what we got to do at the end is we got to engage all the senses, activate multiple senses to create these memorable moments so that these people understand what mission they're tied to because of these emotions that they felt. All right, we're going to close this thing down here. And just like every other week, we are going to close this down with a call to action. All right. So my challenge for you this week is plan. I'm going to underline that, put an exclamation point there. I want you to plan an upcoming conversation or plan an upcoming meeting where you're going to apply these elements of theatrical leadership. You know, I want you to tell a story to motivate your team. I want you to pause for dramatic effect. I want you to use visual cues and drive your point home. Use that framework and inspire your team this week. And what I want you to do after that is I want you to go and share your experience with me on Instagram at Fireforge Leader. Once again, Instagram, share your story at Fireforged Leader. All right, let's celebrate the impact of your theatrical leadership together. Now, I want you to imagine you're going to go give this talk, this one-on-one, this meeting with your people. And I want you to imagine for a second, you step into this room and all eyes are on you, not out of obligation, but because you're already commanding their attention with your presence that you walked into the room with. And now I want you to picture delivering a message so powerful that it doesn't just change behavior, it changes beliefs. All right, guys, leadership's not a science. It's an art form, okay? And that stage is yours. I want you to step into that spotlight and lead like the world is watching.
You have just experienced the heat and pressure of the forge. Remember, words without action are meaningless. Now, after the heat of the forge, shape your thoughts, quench your brain, then put your new tools to use, adding to your leadership. Tune in next week for more lessons from the forge.